Welcome. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Victor Trinidad with NCPMI. This webinar is part of the Digging into Data webinar series. Today's topic is Addressing BIRs Implementation Challenges, presented by Myrna Vagia and Anna Winokur.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Anna Winokur, and we're going to get started today by asking you to submit any questions that you have related to either the BIRs, implementation, or logistics, which is largely what we're going to cover today. We're going to be monitoring the questions and answers, hoping that most of our content will address them, but we'll also be able to answer anything that we haven't planned on covering already. So let's get started. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of what our agenda for this hour will be. We're going to introduce the BIRs Excel workbook, ask for any questions, and we'll provide answers. And then we're going to shift into implementation considerations and try to address some of the most commonly asked questions that we get to try to give you some ideas for improving implementation. And then lastly, we'll wrap up and then provide you with some next steps. So just to start out with, we want to think about what is our goal with a pyramid model. And our goal is really that all young children and their families can access high quality programs. So, what we mean by that is that we have professionals who are working in partnership with families to support children. We're talking about children having positive social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes. And we're also talking about eliminating incidences of suspension and expulsion. So our big focus is on prevention and promotion. And we try to really promote those social and emotional skills that we know our youngest children need to help prevent some of that challenging behavior that we might see. But even when these practices are in place, we recognize that young children are still going to engage in challenging behavior. So the purpose today is to think of what can we do to really make sure we're effectively addressing if these incidences occur. So we know young children will experience challenging behavior, and a lot of times it starts early. So we're talking between 10 and 30% of our preschool children might not be behaviorally ready to succeed in school or emotionally ready to succeed in school. But what's problematic with that is that early problem behavior can really be predictive of future challenges. So we know that early challenging behavior, if not addressed, could be the best predictor of delinquency later in life and adolescence. It might be a predictor of gang membership or even incarceration. So that's where our data decision-making comes into play. We know that's one of the critical elements that we need to successfully implement the pyramid model, and that's gonna be our focus today. How do we gather that meaningful data, and then how do we use it, or how do we help teachers to gather it and really see the value in it? So you'll see two acronyms. When it's all capital letters, we're talking about the Behavior Incident Report System. Sometimes you might see capital BIR with a lowercase s. In that instance, we're talking about the Behavior Incident Report as a plural. But when we're talking about the system, we're talking about what's utilized by programs to collect behavior incidents and analyze them so that we can really successfully address those concerns. And our main goal with this is to be supportive. We're collecting this data to support programs, teachers, and children. We know that data is a powerful tool. So BIR analysis is really what's going to help drive the outcomes that we want to see. It guides those decisions, so how we can put things into place to prevent the problem behavior from happening, but how can we effectively respond? And the data helps us with that. It helps us to identify and address concerns related to how we currently are responding. If we're continuing to see that similar behavior, then chances are what we're doing isn't working. The BIR analysis can also provide summary data across classrooms. It can let us know really important information like who is involved, when are these instances happening, where are the incidents, how are adults currently responding to that, and how can all of that put together inform the practices. And then lastly, it can also help identify not only children, but teachers who might need some additional support.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. So now we're going to talk about accessing the BIRs, so the BIR system. So for those of you who have already downloaded the BIR system, this won't be new to you, but for those who have not downloaded it and would like to download it, you would go to our website, challengingbehavior.org. You would go to the implementation tab. From the implementation tab, you go down to data decision making. And then there's a sub menu from data decision making. There's overview, and then you would click on behavior incident report system. So when you get to there, it'll take you to the main BIR page. And so this page will give you a couple of different things. At the very top, it tells you what the BIR is, and it also has an overview fact sheet that also is this one-page flyer handout that gives you information about what the BIR is and how you would use it. And then it shows you what's in the BIRs package. And so in that package, you have a BIR teacher fact sheet. And this is to distribute with teachers. And Anna will talk about that a little bit later. The Excel workbook. And so you'll have a blank and a demo version, because sometimes you open these workbooks and these spreadsheets, and if they don't have data, you don't really know what they can do. So we do include a demo version. There's the BIR form that you would then, it's a PDF form, which you can then copy and use in your program. You'll have a document, a PDF document that has instructions for when to complete a BIR. That also has a link to the online training for teachers. And so at the very top of that form is that online link for you to train teachers to see that training on when to complete a BIR. And then all of the problem behaviors are also operationally defined, as well as the other categories that you're filling out on that form. Then you also get the data-based decision-making guide. And so that really helps you to look at your data and the data entry guide. And so the data entry guide is just a PDF document that shows you how to enter data. And so when you scroll down below the package content, you'll see a form that you need to fill out. So the form is asking you for your information, your name, your email, your organization. And the only reason that we ask for this information is if there's ever something that we find in the Excel spreadsheet, or we make any updates, then we would use these, your email to email you and let you know that there's been a change or there's been a revision. And what's really nice too is that everything that's in the BIRs packet is free. So for those of you who have used the previous version, so there are 2 versions of the BIR Excel spreadsheet that have been released. The first version was released about 2 years ago, and then it was revised. And so now we have version 2.2 up. If you haven't downloaded it and you downloaded the previous version, you would have received an email from me. It's a survey, a Qualtrics survey, where I invite you to download the new content. If you didn't get that, you can also go to the web page and download the spreadsheet there and any of the other documents that we have updated. So the new version was updated in July of 2020, and it was put online live in August. And so what's new? So the program information tab, this is the tab where you are entering all of your program demographics. So you're entering your enrollment by classroom, by race, ethnicity, by gender. That tab was updated to include 50 classroom IDs. In the previous version, there was only room to put in 30 classroom IDs. So now you have room to put 50. The child enrollment tab now has a search function, and it also allows you to sort the IDs. The data entry tab, it was updated with a view, and I'll show you what that means. But I'll show you in a minute. It's kind of hard to explain. And then there was a couple of different formatting changes that I did throughout. The child ID tab, the deletion of incidents by day. So this was a chart that was at the very bottom of the child summary, and that was deleted because that chart was really hard to read and gave a lot of dates that really didn't help. So I went ahead and changed that one to time of day, and the addition of the classroom of a classroom ID filter. Then the distribution by class ID, that tab, I added child IDs to that tab, and so I'll show you what that means. So here is the child enrollment tab. And so this is what I added. I added a search feature here so that now, let's say you have a lot of children who you've entered and you can't find them. You're not sure, you went to go enter a BIR, but you can't find their ID on the list. So now you can search for that ID. So you just type in whatever it is you're looking for. In this case, I was searching for a name. So you can do that as well. And then it highlights the rows that have whatever you searched for. So that was added. And then also the ability to sort. So these little filters right up here allow you to sort ascending or descending. This is that view that I was talking about on the data entry. And really what it is that I made these first 5 columns kind of static so you can scroll over to the notes column and to the administrative follow-up, but these columns, they still stay on your screen. And it's just, if you're entering data, sometimes you're entering and let's say your papers shuffle around or something like that, and you want to be able to reference back what you were just, what you're entering. So that's that's the change here, is just that little static view. These are just some formatting changes. It's just the moving of some charts. So if you don't see a chart that you previously saw, it may have been moved. It wasn't deleted, but it may have been moved. So this is like an example of a formatting change on the monthly BIRs by classroom ID tab. And then all of the tabs, so like the problem behavior tab, the activity, possible motivation, others involved, all of those tabs they've all had a little, they were all redone. So what I did was I moved all of the filters. So previously you had filters that lined the bottom of this chart. So now they were all moved to the left-hand column. And now all of these filters control the table that gives you problem behaviors by month and the chart that charts that table. So before you could only use the problem behavior filter. So if you wanted to see physical aggression, what does that look like across different months? Then you would see that here and you would see that here, but you couldn't filter by anything else. Now you can filter by classroom, by month, ethnicity, race, gender, and these filters here will control that table, this chart, the bottom table that gives you the % of total incidents by problem behavior, activity, whatever it is, whichever tab you're on, and the total number of incidents. And then it also controls the pie chart and the bar chart. The bar chart, I did make a little change that now the charting of the total number of incidents, there's not a line connecting those because I wasn't trying to really show a trend here. So I deleted those lines so it's only a point, so that you can see how many, the number of incidents and the percentage of incidents on that one chart. So that is the format change that was done there. And then this is that child summary tab where I changed the one that had all of the days on it, and you had an incident by, how many incidents did you have on that specific date? So now I took that off, and now what we have is by time. So it's it'll show you, how many incidents during that time frame. So it is every half hour. So if you enter the time and you enter that correctly, then you're going to have that adjustment up or down 30 minutes. And then that's how it's charted here. And then on that distribution by child ID, this is that very last tab that kind of gives you all of the filters you could possibly think of. And then it gives you that table of classroom IDs, % of total incidents, and total number of incidents. Now you can see the child IDs for that classroom. So you can use that little minus sign there if you don't want to see the child IDs, you only want to see classroom IDs, but now you can kind of see the classroom ID and the child ID in one place. And the reason it was just added was that, it was an easier transition from here to wherever it is you were going to go. If, like, let's say I was looking at classroom 1, 255 incidents, you don't have to go back to another tab to figure out that it's one child with the majority of the incidents. It kind of gives you that information right there. So that is a new change as well. So the spreadsheet, if you're using the previous version, you can still use the previous version. That's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with the previous version, and it might be that you like the previous version better. So that's no problem. No formulas changed, and again, it was mainly just formatting changes, the addition of a couple of filters, but nothing else. So if you're using the previous version, that's no problem. You can continue using that. Questions that I've gotten about Google. So I've gotten lots of questions about Google before. And when in previous presentations, I've said, don't convert your spreadsheet into a Google Sheet. And the reason being was that at that time, Google didn't have the ability to convert some of the things on Microsoft Excel into Google Sheets in a way that made sense. And so it would break everything and it wouldn't work. But now Google does have the functionality. It does have all the features that match the Excel spreadsheet. So the good news is that it can be converted into a Google Sheet, which is really exciting for a lot of people, because it means that if you have a Google Sheet, it means that you can have a Google form. And if you have a Google form, it means your teachers can complete BIRs on a device, and that, by filling out the form connects to your Google Sheet, and now you kind of cut that data entry, so you don't have to do it anymore. So that is very exciting. But when I converted it, it turns out you need to do a couple of different revisions to it so that it can actually work. So the big question now is, will NCPMI convert it? Well, that's to be determined. We will see if we can go ahead and do that. It will require, some time of going in and fixing up all those equations. If you are a super guru and you love Google Sheets, use it all the time, and you want to take that on, then you definitely can. Like I said, it just requires you to go in and fix a couple of different things. So I guess hold on tight to see if that comes about sometime this year or early next year. And also, if you're looking for an online option, EC Swiss is an option. So if you use Swiss, you're familiar with Swiss, they do have an early childhood version, and you can use that version. It's not free, but it is an online format. So if you really want an online format, then that's definitely a good alternative. So previously asked questions. So we're hoping that you guys have questions. If you're thinking of any questions as I'm going through the spreadsheet, doesn't matter what it is, anything that has to do with the spreadsheet, you can go to that Q&A button and just click on there and type in your questions. But some of the questions that we've gotten before are, how many children can be entered into the system at a site? And so it's 175, so you have room to enter up to 175 children, which kind of leads to the next question. Are children entered at the onset of using the BIRs, or are they entered only if a behavior occurs? So you only enter children when you first enter a BIR. And so you don't enter every child in your program. You can, if you have less than 175 or 175, you can, but you don't need to. When you look at the formulas and you're looking at disproportionality, it's not taking your data from how many children you entered in the child enrollment tab. It's taking it from what you entered in the program information tab. So that's why you're not entering all of your children into that child enrollment tab. You only enter the children as you put in the first BIR for that child. Does the BIRs need to be purchased? No, it's completely free. So you just have to fill out that form, and when you download it, it is a zip file. And so you open that up, and you've got everything that I mentioned in the previous slide. And then the other question I've gotten is who enters these data? And that's really decided at the program level. We say to assign a data entry person. Ideally, you would have 2 people who are trained, and that they would, one person would be entering that data at least once a week. And I say to train 2 people because, you know, if anything arises, at least there are 2 people who know how to enter data well. Data use. So questions I've gotten about that. So confidentiality. So we encourage you to use classroom and child IDs. And so instead of using names, use the IDs instead. And this helps to ensure confidentiality. One of the things that you can do is, I know that in the way that the spreadsheet is set up, it has the name of the child or the name of the teacher, and then the ID right next to it. And what you can do is, instead of in the BIR Excel file having that information together, you can have a different file saved somewhere else where you have the name of the person and their ID. And then in the BIRs, you only use the IDs. Okay, and so that helps with confidentiality when you're looking at tables or you're looking at graphs and charts. So that is one thing that you can do, is just kind of keep those 2 separate. And so your next question is, how do I assign IDs? So I will have a YouTube video up. So check out our YouTube channel, the NCPMI, for a walkthrough on creating IDs. It's just some ideas of what you can do to answer, to have to create your IDs. But I'll have that up shortly, and that way you can kind of take that information and create IDs for your children and for your classrooms. And the question about data ownership. So who owns the data? And really, you own the data. So when you download the Excel spreadsheet, that Excel spreadsheet is yours, just like any other file. What you enter into there, the only person who has access is you and whoever you've shared it with. So if you share that Excel file with someone, or if you have it up on a network and there's other people who have access to that network, then those people can see your data. But NCPMI in no way can access your data. So it's yours. And again, only you can share your data. The next question. So there are other, we've made a document using the BIRs frequently asked questions. And here we've kind of compiled all of the questions that we've gotten over the past year or so, and we've answered them there. If there are other questions that come up, my email is there on the front of that spreadsheet where you can email me and ask me any questions that you have. But this really goes through a lot of those questions that we get all the time. And when you download the system, go ahead and make sure that you download this as well so that you have this handy. And we also wanted to talk about the BIRs readiness checklist. How do you know if your program is ready? That really goes through what needs to be in place in your program before you start using the BIRs. There is the webinar prior to this one went through this readiness checklist and what that takes. So you can go onto the website, and we'll talk about that at the end on how you can get there and go ahead and see that recording, and also how to get this handout. So that is definitely a resource that you'll want to, if you're thinking about using it, you haven't quite used it yet, you definitely want to download this, watch the webinar. Okay, so I have a question here about multiple centers in your program, and you're the one who enters all the data. You can pull information on one center, but you don't know how to share that. And they end up seeing all the centers. So if you have data, so the way that we tell you to set up the Excel is the Excel should be one Excel file per building, okay? And so I know that there's a lot of people who don't quite use it that way, but we do tell you one per building. And so if you want to share data with a program and you have multiple on there, the best way you can do this is really, it depends what you're sharing. If it's graphs or tables, any of the charts or tables, then it's just to copy that and paste that onto a Word document, into a PowerPoint, and share it that way. Because even if you, even the file itself, if it contains all the data, if you share the file, they'll have all of the data. So the best way, if you're only trying to share a chart or a table, is to go ahead and actually copy and paste that into Word or PowerPoint and share it that way. Or to have separate spreadsheets for each center. That's the other thing that you can do, is just separate the data by centers.
So we're going to move into implementation considerations. So we encourage you to ask your questions. Thank you for the first person who did ask a question. However, in anticipation, if folks didn't come with questions, we did really look at what are some of the most commonly asked when we're talking about how do we support teachers in really valuing data, understanding how to use BIRs, and how to really get it started in your program, if you haven't already. So I always feel like, stop me if you've heard this one before, but I feel like whenever we train around data, we hear things from teachers like, I don't have time. Sometimes we hear things like, I don't even like data. And I'm not here to teach, not to collect data. So there's ways that we can address each of these. There are a couple things that we prepared to help you get at some of, if you've heard these commonly used statements when you introduce the idea of data in the classroom. So let's just start at the very beginning. This is, if you're not familiar with what the behavior incident report form looks like, this is what it looks like. But what we want to think about as a team, especially as a leadership team for a program, is that you want to start off by thinking about what is your process going to be for using BIRs in your program. Really just some real logistical things like, how are you going to duplicate them? Who's going to do it? Who's going to be the one who makes sure teachers have blank copies available? Who's going to be the one to collect those forms? So that when you do introduce it, it's you've already planned for maybe we're going to make sure you have blank copies on Monday, and we're going to come collect them on Friday, and it's going to be Anna who does that. And that way too, when teachers have some of those first questions, you as a team have already thought about what your process is going to be. So Myrna referenced this, but this is meant exactly for teachers who have some of those concerns or ideas about data that I shared just now. And it's called What Every Teacher Wants to Know About the BIR. So this too addresses common questions, and it gives answers for that are for teachers. So if after this webinar is over and you're thinking, wow, a lot of what they shared is what I hear all the time, this is a really great resource to be able to use when you introduce this to teachers and staff. And it reviews some of those logistics that I just talked about, so it might give you some additional ideas. And it's meant to address those concerns that teachers commonly have so that we can increase the likeliness that they'll see the value and want to use the behavior incident report system. So to get it, I'm here to teach, not to collect data. We have a PowerPoint. This is just the first slide, but it's created, it's probably like 17 slides. It's not meant to be very long, but it's meant to introduce the whole idea of behavior incident reporting. So within the slides, there are notes. So it's made for you who is introducing it to staff so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. But what we definitely encourage you to do is introduce the whole idea with enthusiasm. If you are coming and you're sort of the face of why we should collect data, and you sort of have that same kind of, oh, this is one more thing to do when you're introducing it, then chances of it really being embraced are slim. So use the PowerPoint and use the slides, but also make sure you do it with enthusiasm and make it relatable. I know we do have a lot on our plates already. Teachers have a lot to do already, but if it's relatable to me and I can see that compelling why and how's this going to improve my life as a teacher, then I'm more likely to use it as well. So use the PowerPoint because it does emphasize benefits for teachers, it emphasizes benefits for classrooms, for children, and for programs. So this is what the agenda of that PowerPoint looks like. You see it's meant to be brief, but it's meant to be really compelling too. So we're going to show you on the next slide some examples of those slides. So sometimes when you see the form, it's hard to think of, if I complete this form, how is this going to help me in my classroom? Or how is this going to help our program to improve. So within that PowerPoint, there are examples of some of the graphs that the BIR generates when it's entered, that the system generates. And it just helps to point out some of those things that we can aggregate and put together to make some simple changes to have big impacts on our program as a whole. And then it has some examples. If you click again, it should come up with another example slide. And it focuses a lot on how data can help in the classroom. If you think about my day-to-day as a teacher is in my room, sort of in my four walls. So I do want to know how's this going to help me. So it goes through some examples of how it can help as a classroom, how it can make just life in general better when we're thinking about supporting children who may have challenging behavior. And some of these questions we've heard before, I've only ever used BIRs for individualized supports. Can't it be used for prevention before this level of support is needed? And the emphatic answer to that is yes, absolutely. We're all about prevention and promotion, so it absolutely can be used. It can be used at a classroom level, and it can also be used at a program level, not just as an individual child level. So we have some examples on the next couple of slides. So if I was, looking at, the teacher has been documenting incidents using the BIR form. And as part of our process, we entered it into the BIRs Excel spreadsheet. And we see that we can take a look at what is the most common problem behavior in the classroom. And we see that here for this particular classroom, it's physical aggression. So as a team, when we're thinking about supporting a teacher, we know that that's a really great place to start if they're having large incidents of physical aggression. So that really helps us to make sure that we're devoting our time and coaching and resources to help that teacher to decrease physical aggression. And I think if you've ever been a teacher who's had this issue, I know I have in my classroom, that is one of the first things that you want to do, right, is to address anything that has to do with safety. So we know where we can start with this teacher. You click again, it should give us a program. So it can also let us know at the classroom level, how many incidents are we seeing by month? So sometimes when you're in the middle of teaching or you're sort of in the classroom every day, you feel like maybe things have always been hectic, or it feels like these behaviors are occurring all the time, all day, every month. When we really look at the data and we dig into it, we see that while October was a month that was problematic, the teacher must have implemented some really good strategies because it decreased for November, December, January. And those are things that we can work with teachers to say, okay, what was happening during these months that made it feel that, look how successful things were happening in your classroom for that month. But then we see a big spike in February. This is a good place for us to start some of those conversations, because oftentimes we'll hear teachers say, this behavior is happening all the time, all day. But when we really collect data that's meaningful, we can break it down and see where we can really be of assistance as a team. And then you can look to even more if you're digging into it. Is it really one child who is making up the bulk of those incidents? Is it multiple children? We can dig in and see of all of those incidents of problem behavior, is it really one child that we need to provide supports to? Is it a classroom issue as a whole where we need to provide supports? So it just gives us another layer to really understand the best way to support this particular teacher. Then we also point out to teachers, this can help an entire program. If everybody's being really consistent about completing the form when behavior incidents occur, and we're analyzing that data, we might take a look as a team and say, okay, something is happening around transitions at our site. We need to go and really figure out, why are there so many behavior incidents throughout our program when it comes to transition? And that might lead to some real simple but effective changes that we can make. And when teachers can hear that, it's a lot more exciting to collect that data, because there's nothing better to hear than some simple, effective strategies that we can do to make the program as a whole just feel like it's running smoother. So there you can see it was indicated it was transitions. The next slide is almost like that opposite question from the first one I shared. And it asks if the BIRs can be used for behavior support planning. So the data that's collected absolutely can help inform behavior support plans. It can do things, it can help you figure out what the function might be. It can be of assistance, is there a problematic activity or routine for this child? How have we been responding to challenging behavior with this particular child before? But it's not meant to be a be-all, end-all when we're developing effective behavior support plans. Additional data would need to be collected, but it absolutely can help you to start really drilling into what can we do to support this child effectively. So sometimes we do hear, like I started out, I just don't have time. So the question was posed to us when we used the BIRs last year. Teachers said that even though it's a check mark, it takes a lot of time. So the questions I always pose back to folks when I hear this is, how were the teachers trained to complete the BIR? And oftentimes it can just be an issue of training. Were they able to really practice and see how quickly it can be completed? Were they given any other kinds of suggestions or ideas? If they can't stop and fill it out in the moment, how can they go back to do it later? Is it the majority of teachers who are saying this, or is it only a couple? If it's just a couple, then we can go ahead and see what are the issues? Can we just help those particular teachers? Can we show them how, when other teachers have used this, how much success that they've seen with it? And maybe it's a coaching issue, right? Maybe there needs to be additional coaching, especially if it's just a couple teachers. Maybe those teachers just need some coaching to sort of streamline their own process. So while we give them the process for how the program's going to collect them, maybe it's helping them figure out what works for them in the classroom for completing and documenting the BIR. Don't forget to share the data. I always go back to thinking of if I'm asked to take the time to complete this incident report and I hand it to the person who comes around and collects it and I never see it again, then it makes me wonder whatever happens to it. I know for me, I would think, well, that must just be sitting in a file somewhere. So the likeliness of me to continue doing something that I don't understand or see the value of, or I don't see how it's even being used, I have so many other things on my plate, I'll probably focus on those. So frequently share the data. Make sure that your staff know that, yes, you are collecting these and this is what you're doing with them. These are changes these are things that we're gonna really take a look at to help support you. And make sure when you're sharing that data back that you use graphical representation. It just makes so much more sense to see it in graphic form so that when you're sharing it, you can take a look at trends, you can take a look at what's increasing, decreasing, all of those kinds of really, the questions we always have are much easier explained when you can look at it in graphical form. And you don't want to inundate folks with all kinds of data. Select the data based on what's the purpose of sharing it. So if we go back to that transition, if you think about that example, and we, let's pretend as a team, we presented that transitions as a program has been really a struggle. So we do A, B, and C. We can come back and show how after doing A, B, and C, the transition, those issues have decreased. And then that's a really great opportunity to celebrate those successes. We often forget to celebrate those successes. Another question that has been posed is, how do we do this in family childcare homes? And honestly, it's not that dramatically different than how we're really helping teachers to do it. Or if you're thinking as a leadership team, you still need to be trained. So if that family childcare home is being supported by a coach, the coach would provide that same kind of training to that family childcare home provider. So they have all that same background knowledge, they understand the value of it, they know how to use it, they can decide if as a coach, provider, team, they can figure out what is going to be the best way to get the data from the forms into the Excel spreadsheet. They can also come up with ideas, because oftentimes when you're a family child care home provider, you're the only adult who's in that program, right? So we want to think of helping with tips and tricks. So maybe it's that they can't stop everything and document it, but they write some ideas on a sticky note for later. That same strategy can be used for teachers in programs. You can also think of looking at the data, like a program-wide approach. So if it could be that during Circle, we're seeing really a lot of spikes in challenging behavior occurring. So the coach and the provider can sit down and look. Maybe it's the fact that when you're thinking about family child care homes, we're thinking about multi-age groups. So maybe my Circle is great for my older children, but it's just not working for my 2s, it's not working. I'm making it too long, so it's not really engaging everybody. So the same way we would look at program-wide with those transitions, we could look at it through activities and determine, okay, well, maybe we can shorten circle, or maybe let's think about what kinds of activities we're doing, or what we're doing during that circle time to make it more engaging for everyone, so we can decrease the likeliness of those challenging behaviors. And it can also, in this instance, still be used as part of individualized behavior support planning, knowing that there would be additional information you would want to collect and gather to really create an effective plan. So I saw there was some questions, or at least I thought there were.
Yeah, there was one question asking what is Swiss.
Oh, okay.
And then there's another question about your teacher webinar, or the PowerPoint that you referenced earlier. That's for teachers. Where can they download that?
So that should be a part of the BIRs package when you download that. And if it's not, I will double check of where it got posted. So we'll make sure that you can easily access it. And it comes in, it is PowerPoint slides. So if there are things that you want to add to make it your own, you can absolutely edit it, and you add or take away things as you see fit for the context of your program. Should I address this? I'm sorry, I realized I just skipped over this Swiss question. So that is a school-wide information system. I hope I'm saying that acronym correctly. I'm just so used to saying Swiss. But it is a way that we had, for a long time, it was used for school age, so K through 12, to collect office discipline referrals and take a look at some of that for older children, older students. And when Myrna referenced for early childhood, it is meant for our birth through 5. Another question that we received was, should I be completing a behavior incident report for distance learning? And I think the biggest suggestion I could make for this is thinking of, how old are the children who are participating in your distance learning, and what are you considering really a behavior incident during the time that you're providing that instruction? And then what really is that purpose of that data collection? So if you think about all the examples that I provided, it really leads to, I'm going back to the transitions, it would really lead to me or our team making adjustments, figuring out why transitions are tricky, to then implement some strategies to reduce the amount of incidents we're seeing. So I would think of, if it's one particular child or 2 particular children, and you're thinking that there are things that are occurring during online learning that you would want to capture, I would suggest that you document what those things are for yourself, rather than maybe going the whole route of a behavior incident report form. And then partner with the families and really have some of those conversations of what is it that you're seeing? What are some things you can brainstorm together to really get around whatever that behavior is? You might want to use the form to help guide a conversation, but I wouldn't think of it as something that you would use the same way you would in-person learning. And that's really the biggest thing I always think about with data collection is, what am I going to be using this for? And but with this kind of situation where we're seeing distance learning with young children, I would think partnering with families would be your first option that you would want to go down. There might be things that are beyond the realm of what you're seeing during the time you're on the computer, and the family would be a great partner to help figure out how to make things run smoother. Okay, I see a question that says, are there some strategies for virtual and face-to-face to provide families? So I'm just going to ask a clarifying question about that. Are you referencing strategies to support behavior, or to support virtual learning, or is it related to the BIR itself? So I'll just give you a moment to clarify that question, because I'd be happy to direct you to the right place. But we can move on to the next slide while you're clarifying that for me. And actually that goes back to Myrna.
So now what we'll talk about are the trainings. And I saw you just got a reply, Anna, so if you want to, you said for the BIRs, so if you want to go through that before we go through the trainings, that would be great.
So I have another clarifying question. So for the BIRs for families, are you wanting to know if they should be the ones completing out, like you want to give them strategy, or is it strategies? I guess I'm struggling with what specific strategies around the BIRs. Is it the completion of it, the use of it? And I'll let you type, and then I can type back to you, since it seems like a pretty specific question.
Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and talk about the trainings, because so once you've downloaded the BIR system, a lot of times the next question is, what do I do next? So we've seen the webinar, but I don't know what to do. And so you need to think about, how will staff be trained? So new and existing staff. As I mentioned before, there is a document that does have the teacher training that gives you training on when to complete a BIR. So you'll have to have that training on how and when to complete a BIR. And so teachers and staff who might complete a BIR are encouraged to take that training. It is about an hour long. Then there is, and then become familiar with the definitions of the problem behaviors, and, being able to understand, what the different options are, because you do have to select one option per category. So you have to select, the most intrusive problem behavior, the motivation. So becoming familiar with that and how you fill out the BIR form. Then the other training that you'll have to schedule is how to enter data. And so on the front of the very first tab of the BIR spreadsheet has a link to a YouTube video that your data entry person and the data coordinator should view. So it's about 45 minutes to an hour long, and it goes through entering data. So it goes through each and every tab of the Excel spreadsheet, and it tells, and it, and I show you, from the top of that tab, what are you entering, where are you entering, what are common mistakes in data entry, and then, any tips or tricks that I might have that might be useful to you as a person who's entering data. And then I go into, after you've entered your data, now the fun part of looking at all of your charts and all of your tables, looking at the data. So I've entered the data, and now then I take you into every tab and I show you, here, this is what you're looking at here. These are the equity profiles, alerts, because the system does, if you enter your demographic information by race, ethnicity, it does help you to identify possible disproportionality. And so there are alerts in the system that will alert you to that. And so I take you through that. I show you how to use the different filters, because as the data coordinator, the person who's looking at that data, you'll want to know how to use the filters, how to clear them and all that. And then looking at the charts, and again, just going through each one of those tabs. So the person who's entering the data coordinator will want to go through that. They'll want to have that data entry guide handy, because that also, it's kind of what I've said in the video, but in a PDF form, it's in a document. So it's something that you can reference and go back to if you have questions. And then when you're ready to analyze the data, then using the BIRs database decision-making guide. So your staff will want to make sure that they go review that guide and become familiar with the different tabs that we reference in the guide, or the data, especially the data coordinator. And that's really the data coordinator who will be bringing these summaries and to the leadership team meetings. And we have webinars. So this is the third webinar in the Digging into Data series. So the first one is an introduction. You'll want to go back and see that. The staff to view that would be great. The second one is about the BIRs readiness, which I mentioned earlier. And then there's this one that has a couple of those frequently asked questions. So those are the different trainings that the staff can go through in order to be ready to then start to use the system. So we'll talk a little bit more about the database decision-making guide. it's you want to use that guide to review data monthly and equity data quarterly. It's that question of where do I start? You know, there's so many charts and tables, and there really are. It's every tab has at least 3 or 4 different charts and tables, and so it can become overwhelming. The nice thing about the Excel, it doesn't really require you to be this advanced level Excel user. It's really there isn't really a way that you can mess it up. And so I always say that's why you have the demo version. Go around, play with it, feel comfortable using it. Your data entry person, go into that demo one that you have, and enter into it, look at the data. But there are lots of charts and tables, but the guide really helps you to really go through and see, how do I look at these data, because it feels overwhelming at first. But then once you start using it more routinely, then it'll feel really familiar. And so that is a part of the package that you do download. So the next webinar will be in November, and the date is to be determined at the moment, but the registration will be announced sometime in October, and that's when we'll go through that guide. We'll go through database decision making using the BIRs. So if you're really to the point, where you've entered data, you've been using it, and you want to think about, now how do I look at my data, then this will be a great webinar to kind of go through that. All right, any other questions? Okay, and then, and as, like I said, as questions come up, my email is there. Feel free to email me if you have anything that you think is not functioning correctly, or you're just wondering. Yeah, go ahead and just email me, and I'll be happy to help.
All right, well, thank you so much to our panelists for their wonderful insights. Please remember, your feedback is very important to the work that we do. Please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for our upcoming webinars, access recordings to past webinars, and download pyramid model resources, along with other items. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.